On the issue of government science, I think the other thing that I find a little bit more troubling than just the straight cuts to the programs are the hiring freeze and the idea that it's going to be a lot harder for young scientists to get into government, or even that they would want to get into government. I mean, if you looked at it right now and you were leaving with a PhD, would you necessarily want to go work at the EPA right now? I don't know. What do you guys see as the path for young scientists right now who care about these issues and also want to be relevant to policy?
You go.
It's a tough one. I've been struggling with that. I mean, I think we have to believe that some sanity will return. I don't know what the alternative is. I mean, and the other way to look at it is, well, I mean, at least for those of us, let's start with the old people. I mean, for those of us who are already invested in the system, and who already, have careers as scientists, I think what we have to tell ourselves is that the work we're doing is important, even if some powerful people in the society don't want to recognize it. And it's our responsibility to keep doing that work in the hope that it'll be used and valued. And I hope that that message will be compelling to young scientists as well. Obviously the risks are greater for them, but I know that when I see our students and our junior scientists, there's also a tremendous motivation and passion and idealism, and I hope that that will sustain them through this period.
So I've composed my thoughts now, and I'll say a few things. I used to always canvass classes in high school groups when I would speak to them, and I would ask them if there were an energy corps or a climate corps, would you volunteer 6 months of your time or a year of your time to participate? Let's suppose it's a subsistence wage and housing. And I first started thinking about this a long time ago when President Carter compared the first oil crisis to war. He said it's the moral equivalent of war, and that was, we were not very far post-Vietnam, and I thought, okay, so we're going to have a draft, and we're going to have universal service, and we're going to have people going out and doing all the grassroots ways of basically conservation, insulating houses, installing solar, and so on. And it didn't happen, and it was a plank in the Obama campaign in 2008, and it didn't happen, and I'm not really sure what the reasons are, but if you like that idea, you might try and join me in promoting that idea because it fulfills a lot of needs. It provides people with an opportunity to put their oar in the water. We're not all going to be specialists at installing those solar panels, but I'm quite sure everyone in this room could learn how to do it in a few days, and then it would be an extremely effective thing to do. So I also think if we look back, so people are very poor at dealing with slow-moving emergencies, right? And that's famously part of the climate problem. So, but if we look back at successful responses to slow-moving emergencies in this country, civil rights is the most obvious thing that comes to mind. And what you saw there was that the public was very moved by evidence that senior leaders and young people were actually willing to make personal sacrifices and really pay a price individually in order to change the laws and in order to raise public perception. And I think we may be going into a period where it's necessary and in some sense easier to take that kind of stand. You know, in the Obama administration, who were we against? The president basically agreed with us. But we're now in a situation where there's actually things happening that could warrant civil disobedience, could warrant a kind of very, very active opposition, and offer the opportunity to make personal sacrifices that demonstrate how much we are concerned about this. So, and it won't be the clergy, right? So it's interesting to ponder the science community. We traditionally try and stay out of politics. It's interesting to ponder, if not us, then who?
You did an excellent job of leading into my next question, which was, we have a scientists' march on Washington coming up here in about a week. We have a climate march the week after. It's going to be a pretty busy time of marching. What do you see as the role of scientists right now in pushing both the public policy debate, but also sort of general public awareness on this issue?
Oh, that's such a difficult, that's hard, right? Because our clinging to the shreds of our public reputation for objectivity and for dispassionate advice. We are not politicians. We don't want to be accused of being politicians, and that puts us in a very difficult situation when we see the government actually becoming anti-factual. So would it be okay if I stopped there? I'm going to march, but...
You are?
Yeah, but I certainly understand
What's your sign
the hesitations there.
What's your sign going to say?
What's my what?
What's your sign going to say?
Oh, I haven't composed a sign yet.
Yeah, I'm going to march too, and I don't have a sign yet either. But, you know, I think in climate science for a lot of years, many of us avoided getting directly engaged in the political debate for all the reasons that Peter just said. I mean, we want to have the reputation for objectivity and dispassion. But I think, I mean, for many of us, this transition had been occurring away from that view and towards a more active and engaged public stance had been occurring for some time. But now, especially when we see, you know, in the highest parts of the U.S. government and elsewhere in the world to a lesser extent, such opposition, not just to specific policies, but to the whole enterprise of science and the whole use of evidence in policy making, it becomes easier to feel the need to be engaged or harder to stay out of it. I mean, because the principles are so basic that we're talking about. I mean, the principles of facts, evidence, and the scientific method are so basic that you don't really have to be an advocate for a specific policy to think that's important. So I think we're going to see a lot more activism. I mean, when it comes to climate per se, though, I think there's also just a general sense that who are we kidding? We're human beings too, right? And we study these data and these bits of evidence and the whole picture coming out of all the tools we use, the climate models and everything else, to understand this story. And it's just impossible, if you do that, to come away not thinking that we have a problem and we need to do something about it. We can argue about exactly what. And I think scientific entities like universities and professional societies are right not to get too in the weeds of advocating for specific policies, but in terms of advocating for a science-based approach, and in the case of climate, for the need to do something rather than opposing all action, as the White House currently is at this point, it's a no-brainer.